The CFO stood across from me in his corner office, his face turning red like a kettle about to boil. I'd refused to withdraw my ethics complaint against a senior director, and Marcus Henderson didn't take rejection well. He snatched my employment contract from his mahogany desk, the one I'd signed 3 years ago when I joined Apex Financial Group. His hands shook as he tore it clean down the middle, then threw both pieces into the metal trash bin beside his chair. The sound echoed in the silent room. "Consider this your last day, Brooks," he sneered, straightening his tie. "We don't keep troublemakers at Apex." I bent down slowly, picked up the torn pages from the trash, and smoothed them against my blazer. Then I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Then I guess you just fired the wrong woman." My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. Because by the time I was done with Marcus Henderson and his corrupt empire, his career would be the one torn into pieces nobody could tape back together. 3 weeks earlier, everything had seemed normal at Apex Financial Group in downtown Atlanta. I was a senior analyst in the corporate finance division, handling quarterly reports for our biggest clients. That Tuesday morning, I'd been reviewing projections for Titanium Industries, one of our anchor accounts worth $12 million annually. The numbers didn't match. Revenue figures had been adjusted upward by nearly $200,000 with no supporting documentation. When I dug deeper into the shared drive, I found notes in the metadata showing deliberate alterations to make quarterly profits look stronger than reality. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a simple error or typo. Someone had deliberately changed client data to inflate our success metrics. I printed everything, made backup copies on my personal drive, and documented each discrepancy with timestamps. Then I did what I thought was right. I filed an official ethics complaint with the company's compliance department, naming Director Kyle Brennan as the person responsible for the alterations. I wasn't trying to start a war. I just wanted the truth documented and fixed. I had no idea that in corporate America, truth was poison, and I just handed Marcus Henderson a cup he'd forced me to drink. The silence started the very next day after I submitted my complaint to compliance. When I walked into the office Wednesday morning, conversations stopped mid-sentence. People who normally greeted me suddenly found their keyboards fascinating. My closest work friend, Mia Patterson from accounting, actually turned away when I approached her desk during lunch. I sat alone in the break room, my salad untouched, watching colleagues whisper and glance in my direction. My emails to the project team went unanswered for hours, then came back with one-word responses when they came at all. Nobody asked me to lunch. Nobody stopped by my desk. Even the intern who usually peppered me with questions about Excel formulas avoided eye contact in the hallway. It was corporate isolation, the kind that eats away at your confidence one silent hour at a time, making you question if you'd made a terrible mistake. The walls seemed to close in tighter each day. But what they didn't understand yet was that silence could work both ways. While they ostracized me, I was watching, listening, and documenting everything with the careful attention to detail that had made me valuable in the first place. Friday morning, Marcus Henderson's assistant called my extension. "Mr. Henderson would like to see you in his office at 10, she said, her voice carefully neutral. When I arrived, he was sitting behind his massive desk, sipping coffee from a mug that said "World's Best CFO." He gestured to the chair across from him with false warmth. "Please sit down." I sat, keeping my expression blank. "I've reviewed your complaint about the Titanium account," he began, leaning back in his leather chair. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about standard adjustment procedures." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "These things happen in finance. Numbers get revised. It's normal. So here's what I'm proposing." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "Withdraw your complaint, and I'll make sure this all goes away. No hard feelings. We'll say it was a miscommunication, and everyone moves forward." When I didn't immediately respond, his voice grew sharper. "You think this company cares about your little spreadsheet crusade?" The fake warmth evaporated completely. "You're making problems where none exist." I met his gaze steadily and said nothing. But my phone was in my blazer pocket, and the record button had been activated the moment I sat down. Monday morning, I tried logging into my computer and got an error message. "Access denied." I called the IT help desk, and after 20 minutes on hold, a technician named Devin told me my system credentials had been disabled. It says here the order came from executive level, he explained, sounding confused. I can't override it without authorization from your department head. I walked to the IT floor personally, keeping my expression calm even though my heart was racing. The department manager, Oscar Williams, looked uncomfortable when I appeared at his desk. There's nothing I can do, he said, not meeting my eyes. The directive came from above. Maybe talk to HR. I thanked him politely and returned to my desk, where I sat staring at the locked screen. To anyone watching, I looked defeated, maybe even panicked. But inside, I was smiling. Because 3 months ago, I'd started keeping offline backups of every important file, every audit trail, every signature, every email. They thought cutting my access would blind me, but I could still see everything perfectly. And now I had proof they were trying to silence me. During lunch that Tuesday, I went to the building's food court and sat near 2 accountants from the revenue team. They didn't notice me behind the tall planter as they discussed something in low voices. They want the titanium ledgers adjusted again before the board meeting, the younger one said, stirring his soup nervously. Henderson said make it clean this time.
No traces.
The other accountant, a woman I recognized but didn't know by name, sighed. I hate doing this. If external auditors ever dig deep, we're all finished. They went silent when another employee approached their table. I stayed frozen behind the planter, my sandwich forgotten. This was bigger than one altered report. They were systematically burying financial irregularities across multiple accounts, and it was happening with Marcus Henderson's direct knowledge and orders. The same client for my original complaint was being manipulated again, and they were getting bolder. Something was being actively buried, and they were working fast to cover their tracks before the quarterly board review. That evening, I went home to my apartment, opened my laptop, and decided it was time to start digging deeper into files they thought I could no longer access. I still had an old admin credential I'd been given months ago during a system migration project. It was supposed to be temporary, but nobody had ever revoked it. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside me, I logged into the shared network through the backup portal. My hands shook slightly as I navigated to the finance directories. Entire folders related to the titanium account had been wiped clean. Quarterly reports, projection models, adjustment logs, all gone from their normal locations. But I knew something most people didn't. Deletion leaves traces. I checked the metadata and archive logs, and there it was. Timestamps showing exactly when each file had been deleted and by whom. The user credentials were partially masked, but the initials were clear enough to identify. MH. Marcus Henderson. The chief financial officer himself had personally deleted evidence related to my ethics complaint. I took screenshots of everything, backed them up to 3 different locations including a cloud service not connected to the company, and saved the timestamps in a password-protected file. My hands had stopped shaking. Now I wasn't just defending myself. I was building a case. Wednesday morning, I received a meeting invitation from Human Resources. The subject line read confidential discussion. When I arrived at the HR office, the director, Pamela Foster, sat across from me with a folder and a practiced, sympathetic expression. We've completed our preliminary review of your complaint, she began gently, as if delivering bad news to a child. Unfortunately, we found the claims to be unsupported by sufficient evidence. These kinds of misunderstandings happen in complex financial environments. She slid a document across the table. Given the disruption this has caused, we'd like to offer you a voluntary severance package. 6 months' salary, extended benefits, and a neutral reference. All you need to do is sign this agreement stating you won't discuss this matter with anyone outside the company. I picked up the folder slowly, reading through the non-disclosure agreement, the mutual separation terms, and the liability waiver. Then I looked up at Pamela and smiled politely. Thank you for this. I'll need some time to review it with an attorney. Her smile tightened. I didn't sign anything. Instead, that afternoon, I made copies of the entire severance offer and mailed them directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission's whistleblower office, along with a detailed letter explaining the attempted payoff. By Friday, I'd been officially placed under review for insubordination and unprofessional conduct. The email came from my supervisor, Victoria Mills, who'd barely spoken to me in 2 weeks. Effective immediately, my workload tripled. I was assigned to close out 4 overdue account reconciliations with impossible deadlines, all due by Monday morning. When I stayed late trying to complete them, security asked me to leave at 6 o'clock, saying I didn't have after-hours authorization anymore. The next day, I was called into Victoria's office and sent home early for having a poor attitude, even though I'd barely spoken to anyone. Every move was calculated and documented by them. They were building a termination case, creating a paper trail that would justify firing me for performance issues rather than retaliation. They wanted me to quit, to break down, to walk away. But I'd worked in corporate finance for nearly a decade. I knew exactly what they were doing, and I wasn't leaving. Not until I turned their own system against them, using every policy and regulation they thought protected them to expose what they'd hidden. That Sunday evening, my phone rang with a number I almost didn't recognize. It was Tarek Washington, a former colleague who'd moved to Apex's legal compliance department 2 years ago. We'd stayed friendly, but hadn't talked in months. "I shouldn't be calling you," he said quietly, his voice tense. "But I thought you should know. They're preparing termination paperwork for you. It's scheduled for Tuesday. Henderson thinks you'll just fold and disappear once you're officially gone." I gripped my phone tighter. "Have you seen any of the reports I mentioned in my complaint?" There was a long pause. "I've seen some things that concern me deeply. If what you're saying is accurate, this company is in serious legal trouble. More than just bad accounting." His voice dropped even lower. "I can't do much from inside without risking my own position, but I can tell you this, they're scared. Really scared. That's why they're moving so fast." He paused again. "Document everything, and I mean everything." I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat in my living room, staring at my laptop, and realized I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. Tarek had just become my inside source, whether officially or not. Tuesday morning arrived like a thunderstorm. I was called to Marcus Henderson's office again, but this time Pamela from HR was already there, sitting stiffly in the corner with her leather portfolio. Marcus didn't waste time with fake pleasantries. "This is your final opportunity to make this easy," he said, his jaw clenched tight. "Withdraw your baseless complaint, sign the separation agreement, and walk away with your dignity intact." I looked at him calmly. "No." His face flushed dark red. He stood up abruptly, grabbed my personnel file from his desk, and pulled out my original employment contract. Then, while Pamela watched in frozen horror, he tore it clean in half, the sound of ripping paper loud in the quiet office. "You're done here, Brooks. Effective immediately." He threw the torn pieces toward the trash bin. Some missed and fluttered to the floor. Pamela looked like she wanted to disappear into the wall. I stood slowly, picked up both halves of my contract, and folded them carefully. "I'll be keeping these," I said quietly. Then I walked out, and as I stepped into the hallway, I pulled out my phone and hit send on an email I'd drafted hours earlier, one that would change everything. The email blast went to every member of Apex Financial Group's board of directors simultaneously. 12 people received identical messages at exactly 9:47 in the morning. The subject line read, "Whistleblower documentation for your immediate review." Attached were PDFs of falsified financial reports, deleted file metadata showing Marcus Henderson's credentials, internal memos about adjusting client accounts, recorded audio from my meeting with the CFO, and the severance offer attempting to buy my silence. I'd organized everything into a clear timeline with supporting evidence for each claim. Within 10 minutes, I heard shouting coming from the executive floor, even though I was down in the main lobby collecting my belongings from my desk. Phones started ringing constantly. Doors slammed. Assistants rushed through hallways carrying folders. People who'd ignored me for weeks now stared openly as I calmly packed my personal items into a cardboard box, a framed photo of my parents, my coffee mug, my desk plant. I moved slowly and deliberately, making no effort to hide my actions. The calm in their corporate storm, just as I'd planned. The real chaos was only beginning, and they had no idea what was coming next. By noon, The executive floor looked like a disaster zone. Senior managers paced in tight circles, their phone conversations tense and clipped. I heard later from Mia, who finally texted me, that 3 emergency meetings had been called in 2 hours. The board chair had apparently flown in from Chicago ahead of schedule. Marcus Henderson's door stayed closed, blinds drawn, while people rushed in and out carrying locked briefcases and laptops. Legal team members I'd never seen before appeared in the building, signing in at reception and heading straight upstairs. Meanwhile, I sat in my car in the parking garage, watching everything through the building's glass walls. Employees looked confused and frightened. Some gathered in small groups, whispering urgently. A few glanced toward my old desk area, which was now conspicuously empty. But I wasn't celebrating yet, even though my evidence was now in the hands of people who could actually do something about it. I knew corporations like Apex didn't go down without fighting dirty first. They still had one major card to play, and I was certain Marcus Henderson would use it. The smear campaign. I drove home and prepared for the next phase of the battle. That evening at 7:30, my phone rang from a block number. I answered cautiously. "Is this Ms. Brooks?" A woman's voice asked professionally. "This is Catherine Mills from the Securities and Exchange Commission's Enforcement Division. We received your submission this morning regarding Apex Financial Group." My heart pounded. Yes, that's me. For the next 40 minutes, she asked detailed questions about my employment, the complaint process, the evidence I'd gathered, and the circumstances of my termination. Her tone was neutral but thorough. When she finished, she said, "Please send everything you have to the secure email address I'm providing. All original files, recordings, screenshots, and any other documentation. We'll be opening a formal investigation." I sent everything that night, triple-checking each attachment. 2 days later, on Thursday morning, federal investigators walked into Apex Financial Group's lobby. They were wearing suits and carrying badges. Employees watched in shocked silence as they were escorted directly to the executive floor. I wasn't there to see it, but Mia sent me updates throughout the day. The investigators spent 6 hours in the building, and they left carrying sealed boxes of documents. Marcus Henderson's nightmare had officially begun, and mine was transforming into vindication. By Friday, the entire company was on lockdown. According to Tarek, who risked sending me a brief, encrypted message, all employee system logins had been temporarily frozen while IT conducted a comprehensive audit. Nobody could access financial files without direct supervisor approval and logging. The CFO's office door remained shut all day, blinds closed, with security stationed outside. Rumors spread through the building that federal auditors had confiscated Marcus Henderson's desktop computer, laptop, and personal hard drives. Employees who'd once treated me like a pariah now looked at me differently when they saw me in the building parking lot. Not with pity or contempt, but with something closer to awe and fear. I'd become the person who'd stood up to the most powerful executive in the company and brought federal investigators down on everyone. Some people nodded respectfully when they passed me. Others avoided eye contact entirely, worried they'd be caught up in whatever was coming. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because I knew how these situations played out. Cornered executives didn't surrender quietly. They fought back with everything they had, and Marcus Henderson still had one weapon left: reputation destruction. I just had to wait for him to use it so I could turn it against him too. Monday morning, an anonymous article appeared on a financial industry gossip blog that covered Atlanta's business community. The headline read, "Disgruntled employee makes false accusations after performance issues." It didn't name me directly, but the details were unmistakable. A female analyst at a major financial firm who'd been underperforming and facing termination had filed baseless ethics complaints as retaliation. The article included supposed performance reviews showing I'd received warnings about missing deadlines and unprofessional conduct. None of it was true, but it was published online for everyone to see. My phone started buzzing with messages from former colleagues asking if I'd seen it. I read the article 3 times, my anger building with each pass. It was clearly planted by someone inside Apex, someone desperate to discredit me before the investigation went further. So I opened LinkedIn, crafted a single careful response, and posted it publicly. Interesting article. I look forward to letting the SEC investigators speak to my actual performance record and the evidence I provided them. I hit post and watched. Within 2 hours, my response had been viewed 40,000 times. By evening, it reached 200,000 views, and reporters from Atlanta Business Chronicle and local news stations started calling my phone asking for interviews. According to multiple sources inside Apex, Marcus Henderson completely unraveled that Tuesday. During a routine operations meeting, he apparently stood up abruptly, shouted something about me ruining everything he'd built, and punched the conference room wall hard enough to leave a dent. His executive assistant, a woman named Vanessa, who'd worked for him for 8 years, walked out immediately and submitted her resignation before lunch. She didn't even stay for the standard 2 weeks' notice. Other employees reported hearing him screaming behind his closed office door, his voice carrying down the hallway despite the soundproofing. By Wednesday, compliance officers from the company's insurance carrier arrived and seized his personal computer, email archives, and phone records under legal preservation orders. Tarek managed to send me one more message. They found an email thread you need to know about. Subject line: "Shut her up. Your name is all over it." My hands trembled as I read his text. Marcus Henderson hadn't just retaliated against me. He documented his retaliation in writing, probably thinking his position made him untouchable. That email alone could end his career and open the company to massive legal liability. The CFO, who'd torn my contract, had just torn apart his own defense. Thursday afternoon, Apex Financial Group issued a terse press release. CFO Marcus Henderson has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into compliance matters. The director I'd originally reported, Kyle Brennan, was also quietly removed from his position, along with 2 other senior managers whose names I didn't immediately recognize. But the biggest shock came Friday morning when Pamela Foster, the HR director who tried to buy my silence, was also suspended. Her assistant sent a company-wide email announcing her temporary absence and directing all HR inquiries to the interim director. Within a single week, the entire power structure that had tried to crush me was collapsing. Senior positions were emptying like water draining from a broken tank. Employees walked around looking shell-shocked, unsure who was in charge or what would happen next. And I was sitting at home, fielding calls from employment attorneys who wanted to represent me in what they assured me would be a substantial wrongful termination lawsuit. But I wasn't interested in suing yet. I wanted to see this play out completely first, to watch every domino fall exactly as it should. Because I was suddenly the last woman standing in an empire that was crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. 3 weeks after my termination, I received a certified letter from Apex Financial Group's board of directors. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. The letter was formal and carefully worded. After thorough review of recent events and internal investigation findings, the board wishes to express regret regarding the handling of your ethics complaint. We recognize errors were made in the response process. Effective immediately, we would like to offer you full reinstatement to your previous position with back pay, benefits restoration, and a formal apology from executive leadership. They wanted me back. They wanted me to return and help clean up the disaster they'd created by ignoring my warnings. The letter continued with assurances about implementing new compliance protocols and ethics oversight. I read it 3 times, then walked to my kitchen and actually laughed out loud. The sound echoed in my empty apartment. Because 2 days earlier, I'd already accepted an offer from Meridian Financial Partners, Apex's biggest direct competitor in the Atlanta market. Better title, higher salary, signing bonus, and a culture that actually valued integrity. I folded the board's letter neatly, placed it in my growing evidence folder, and composed a polite decline. My battle wasn't about getting my old job back. It was about accountability, and I'd already moved forward. Apex's board requested one final meeting before I officially declined their offer. They called it an exit conversation, but I knew it was really about damage control. I agreed to attend on one condition. The board chair, Hamilton Price, had to be present in person, not calling in remotely. They agreed. The meeting took place in a conference room I'd never accessed before, reserved for board-level discussions. Hamilton sat at the head of the table with 2 other board members flanking him. They asked me to explain everything: why I'd filed the complaint, why I hadn't accepted the severance, why I'd gone to federal investigators. I answered each question calmly and thoroughly, walking them through my decision-making process step by step. When they asked what could have been done differently, I looked directly at Hamilton and said, "You could have believed me the first time I raised concerns. Accountability isn't insubordination. Truth-telling isn't disloyalty. Those things used to mean something in business." The room went completely silent. I placed my old employee badge on the polished table and stood up. "Thank you for the opportunity to explain." Then I walked out, knowing my phone was recording everything from my bag, just like every other meeting. That recording would become my closing statement if anyone ever questioned my version of events. 2 days later, Atlanta Business Journal published a major investigative piece with a headline, "Whistleblower Exposes Financial Fraud at Prominent Atlanta Firm." The article didn't name me specifically for legal reasons, but everyone in the industry knew exactly who they were talking about. It detailed the falsified reports, the retaliation tactics, and the federal investigation now underway. The journalist had clearly spoken to multiple sources inside Apex. My LinkedIn inbox exploded overnight with messages. Former colleagues apologized for avoiding me. Junior analysts thanked me for having courage they wished they'd shown. Other women in finance reached out, sharing their own stories of being silenced or pushed out for speaking up. One message came from a young accountant at a different firm. "You changed how I think about my responsibility to tell the truth. Thank you." The article's impact was immediate and brutal for Apex. Their stock price dropped 17% in a single trading day as investors panicked about potential fraud liability and regulatory fines. And Marcus Henderson? He disappeared from public view completely. No statements, no social media, nothing. Just silence from the man who'd once torn my contract in half with such confidence. His absence spoke louder than any apology ever could have. The empire he'd protected through intimidation was crumbling into dust. 2 months passed. I started my new position at Meridian Financial Partners and discovered what it felt like to work somewhere that actually valued ethics and transparency. My new boss, Claire Richardson, had hired me specifically because of what I'd done at Apex. "We need people who do the right thing even when it's hard," she told me during the interview. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, the news broke nationally. I was reviewing quarterly forecasts in my new corner office when my phone buzzed with a CNN alert. Former CFO indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud and obstruction. I clicked through to the full article. Marcus Henderson had been formally charged by federal prosecutors with falsifying financial records, destroying evidence, and retaliating against a whistleblower. If convicted on all counts, he faced up to 15 years in prison and millions in fines. The article included his booking photo. He looked smaller than I remembered, older and cornered, his expensive suit rumpled, and his expression hollow. I stared at that photo for a long moment, feeling something complicated. Not quite satisfaction, not quite pity, but a sense of completion. The man who'd tried to silence me with intimidation and illegal retaliation was now facing the full consequences of his choices. But I still wasn't finished yet. There was one more chapter to write. A month after the indictment, Meridian Financial Partners asked me to speak at their annual leadership conference about ethics and corporate responsibility. I stood before more than 100 executives, managers, and analysts from offices across the Southeast. My hands gripped the podium as I began. Integrity costs nothing until it's gone. Then it costs everything. I talked about recognizing red flags, documenting concerns properly, and understanding that speaking up isn't disloyalty. It's exactly what loyalty to truth and stakeholders requires. I explained how silence protects the guilty while punishing the innocent. The room was absolutely silent. Some people took notes. Others just stared at me, processing. Then I noticed a woman in the front row, probably in her mid-20s, quietly wiping tears from her cheeks. When I finished and opened the floor for questions, she raised her hand immediately. "How did you find the courage?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm dealing with something similar, and I'm terrified." I looked at her directly. You find courage by remembering that your reputation is built on what you do when no one's watching, and your character is proven by what you do when everyone is. After the session ended, she approached me privately and handed me a folded note before disappearing into the crowd. That note would change everything again. I unfolded the note later in my office. It was from the young woman who'd cried during my presentation. Her name was Rachel, and she'd been an intern at Apex Financial Group during my final months there. She wrote, "Thank you for speaking up. You saved my career and probably my sanity. I'd been watching what they did to you and was about to quit the industry entirely, thinking this was just how business worked. But you showed me it doesn't have to be that way. I reported an issue at my current company last week because of your example, and they actually listened. They fixed it." I never thought that was possible. I read her words 3 times, feeling something shift inside my chest, the weight I'd been carrying for months finally lifting. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe freely again. What started as my fight for accountability had become something bigger. My story had given someone else permission to speak up, and her company had responded the right way. That ripple effect was worth every difficult moment. But there was still one more person who wanted to thank me, someone I never expected to hear from again. That email arrived the next morning, and it completed the circle in a way I never could have imagined. The email came from Hamilton Price, the board chair at Apex Financial Group. The subject line read, "Unnecessary change." I opened it carefully, unsure what to expect. He wrote, "Ms. Brooks, I wanted you to know that Apex's board has voted unanimously to implement comprehensive ethics reforms. We're establishing a new whistleblower protection policy with independent oversight and guaranteed investigation procedures. After considerable discussion, we've decided to name it the Brooks Policy in your honor, recognizing your courage in bringing serious issues to light despite significant personal cost. We hope this ensures no employee ever faces what you experienced. Your integrity set a standard we intend to meet." I sat back in my chair, staring at my computer screen in complete silence. My name would be permanently attached to ethics protections at the company that had tried to destroy me for telling the truth. Marcus Henderson had ripped my contract in half to silence me and erase my voice from his company. Instead, I'd rewritten the rules entirely, and now my name would outlast his by decades. Sometimes revenge isn't fire or fury. Sometimes it's reform, change, and a legacy that protects others. The CFO thought tearing paper would end my story. But I'd written a new ending in permanent ink that would never tear, protecting the next person who dared to tell the truth.